used to be an assistant.
How did you get to the bookshop? This way and
Rented on his own.
He is a master couturier. The very fabric of life is his canvas. The threads of creativity are his tools. His every drape evokes beauty, and every silhouette tells a story. A man who defines style and influences the fashion trends of an entire nation. From Los Angeles to Paris, to Mumbai, and finally to his ancestral home in the charming village of Kolvale in Goa. He is today one of India's most creative designers. For him, there's inspiration at every corner. An open field, a coconut palm, the ripple of water, or the swaying of tall grass. He translates this visual beauty and complexity of texture into breathtaking creations on the rack. He is an achiever of the highest standard, with several accolades to his name. And he continues to lend his creative genius to numerous walks of life where he leaves his imprint. A pioneer of the fashion industry, an expert craftsman, a true son of the Goan soil. Wendell Rodrigues.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be here in Gansauli. It's my first time. I want to thank everyone who has invited me, especially Nilufa, who's been going back and forth. I was supposed to have a friend here, but she had to back out. So I told my office, I said, can you please compile a set of what work I've done? And they compiled it, and I'm afraid I should have put a small statutory warning that this might sound like a boast because I'm talking about myself and my work. But that's not really the fact. The fact of the matter is, I just want to tell you a little bit of background about myself before I even get into the PowerPoint presentation. You know, I was born in a chawl in Bombay, and I went to a public toilet with a small pot in my hand, and I never forgot that place. My parents were young lovers, I was the eldest child, and we had to stay there for a bit, and I'm the only one who recalls that background, and till today I have a phobia of toilets in general, and public in particular. So people now see me in the company of the Aishwarya that I've been associated, but even she traveled with me by train, and everyone has a small beginning. One of the biggest things that happened in a series of events in my life was, there was always something presented to me, and I took it like a great opportunist. I grabbed it, and I used it. And I think all of us should be that way, because the opportunity comes once in a way, and if we don't recognize that opportunity, we'll get nowhere. So I'm going to go straight away into my first slide. In fashion, because I lived in Goa when I first went to live in Goa after the Bombay riots, that affected me terribly. I said, how am I going to create beauty when I was staying in Mahim and saw the whole city going up in flames? So I moved to Goa and I settled there, and everyone said, you're committing professional suicide. Nobody's going to kind of remember you after this. You're going to a small village, you're lost in Goa. And I proved them all wrong just by chance. Being close to nature, I could manage to give the country minimalism and eco-friendly clothes and put this Goan resort flavor into the clothes as well at a time when these words were not even coined. So I was rather surprised in a sea of, at that time, in the late 80s when I finished off with Paris and Los Angeles and came back to live in India, I went and looked and saw what was available and what I could contribute to fashion. And all I saw was brightly colored silk with embroidery. So I said, I'm definitely not going to do that. There was this other India hiding and lurking in the background that people liked and appreciated, internationally and locally. This was the thing about the temples of South India, about the science of Ayurveda, the concept of Indian geometry, of which we invented the zero, this whole concept of Gandhiism, spiritualism. I said, I'm going to take that and translate that into fashion. And I put white clothes on the racks and they said, what are these clothes? Are we supposed to wear them and go to a funeral? And stuff like that when I started out. But I started out because of what happened in Paris. I was getting an internship at Yves Saint Laurent and I went and showed my portfolio there. And the lady told me, she said, Mr. Rodrigues, you know your sketches are good and we'll happily take you on as an intern. But I want to ask you one thing. I've been to your country many times and I've been to your state many times. Why don't I see your state and country in your clothes? Why do I see the 7 garments that we in the West have? We have just a blouse, a skirt, a trouser, a jacket, a cocktail dress, and an evening gown, and that's all that we have. And in your country, you have hundreds of thousands of clothes. And why don't you use that? Because Mr. Saint Laurent himself can do these clothes that you're so with. I didn't do the internship, and the second thing that I learned was my teacher, Rose Gire, in class in Paris. She said, you know, Wendell, you're good. But I want to tell you one thing. Do not be good in your school or in your college or in your street or in your city or in your country. Strive to be internationally good, because when you strive to be internationally good, you'll do something internationally new, and that's when your country and the world will sit up and notice. And with that in mind, till today, I can go to Karl Lagerfeld at Chanel and say, boss, you do some great work, but mine is no less because it comes from the heart. And I think that is a big lesson that everyone needs to learn. So I went to Goa and I started making a sarong skirt and these little tops and whatever it is. And of all things in the world's largest garment fair came knocking at my door and said that, you know, can you come to Paris and we want to present you as the first Indian designer. I said, why me? They said, because you're different and we see a different new India in your clothes. So that is the great Helena Christensen. There's something very strange about our country. You need to make it abroad to make it big in your own country. So when I was leaving, Satya Saran at Femina gave me a column and said, can you write something on voluptuous women? Now, I love that word, you know. I don't use small, large, extra large. That is very demeaning to women. So if you come to my shop in Goa, you will find everything according to racks. You don't need to go through clothes that are made for stick insects that walk my ramp. We have racks that are done according to size, and we tell you what size you are. So small, medium, voluptuous, very voluptuous, and voluptuous goddess. So this is resort wear. And then everywhere I got the opportunity, I listened to the voice at Yves Saint Laurent and I said, I'm going to put my country in the clothes. So when Paris invited me as the first Indian designer on an invitation to show at the world's largest, most prestigious garment fair called the Pret-a-Porter Salon de Paris, I said, I'm going to show Goa Spa. I mean, we don't have spas in Goa, but then fashion gives you license to dream. So they have spas in Kerala. But I said, okay, never mind. If Armani can take our sherwani and our jacket, we can steal from the other states of India, and we can do whatever we want. So we took Goa Spa over there. We had to steal the marigolds in their hair from the public garden at 2 o'clock in the morning, because they don't sell marigolds in Paris. And then we started to make, in my first collection out of Goa, we began to make earrings out of coconut shells and stuff like that, when people didn't even get buttons out of coconut shells. And we sent it out. This sari is a very interesting sari. We made only 2 copies at that time. One was taken by Aishwarya to London when she won Miss World. She said, can I have that sari? And I gave it to her. And the other was bought by my friend and sister Rekha, who said that she would. I said, but that sari's already gone to London. Do you still want to buy a duplicate sari? So she said, no, don't worry about that, Wendell. I'll call up Aishwarya. Each time I'm going to wear the sari, and she'll call me when she's wearing, so we don't end up on the red carpet with the same sari. And then there were all these wonderful people say that, you know, my God, Wendell, you have discovered Anushka Sharma and Malaika Arora and Deepika Padukone. But you know what? These girls were so beautiful. If I didn't find Deepika Padukone in that mall at the Leela, somebody else would have. So it's not a great thing to say, I discovered them like I was some great godfather to all these young girls. But we did in the end. You know, I gave Frida Pinto the first chance to walk on the ramp, even though she was very short. And she said, but I'm not even 5'5" or 5'6". I said, but you know, Malaika is 5'2", and we made a star out of her, and if we can make a star out of you, it'll be great. So then my dear friend Mr. Mario Miranda, whose lovely cartoon is up there, I don't know why they've knocked off his signature from the Kushwant Singh in the light bulb. Mario Miranda told me, Wendell, there's this garment called the Panbaju. Can you do a research on it? I had never heard of this garment. It was only worn in South Goa to dance the Mando. So I said, but I'll do a research. So I went and did the research because he said, you're the most qualified person. You teach history of world costume in college and you can do this. So I did it. The book, unfortunately, that the chapter was supposed to come in did not come out. But I enjoyed the process so much. I said, now I'm going to do all the costumes of Goa and do a research on a topic that was never done before. So I took 10 years to research, 1 year to write the book. In that 10 years, I began jewelry, and I'm happy to assemble. Have in my old house, my 450-year-old house, we moved out to a smaller house because we had 2 men and 5 dogs living in one house, and we don't need such a big house. That's going to become the Moda Goa Museum based on this book, and we are going to open in March 2019 for the public. Yeah, we said we don't need this money. I mean, who needs all these clothes? Let's give something back and leave it for the society. My second book was The Green Room. It was a memoir. We were thrown a challenge at the Goa Book Club where they said you have to write 2,000 words a day, and at the end of it you'll have 60,000 words, which is enough. I was the writer who wrote what do I write about? So I wrote my book, and none of the other writers wrote. I wrote from 4 to 6 in the morning because I had my fashion work after that, and the publisher pounced on it and took the book. And Malaika Arora went on the cover for my first fashion show in Goa. That was over there. And then my third book was called Poske, which is a book that is on a shameful tradition, which all Goans were quaking in their feet and saying, now he's bought us so much pride, now he's going to bring us shame. Because it was a shameful tradition of how rich people would adopt young children and then use them as slave labor, as sex objects, and all sorts of various things for their entire life. So those are the 3 books I wrote. I'm now on to my my 4th book, because Poske was, slotted for this kind of adult reading only. I'm now doing a cartoon book on the history of Goa, an Asterix comic, colored, so that the children can sit and color it and learn about Goa as well. And then I wrote on many books. Every time somebody told me, can you write on this, can you write on that? And I wrote for all these other books that you see. I'm sure all of you all have been to Goa. How many of you have not been to Goa? Oh, one hand up. Ma'am, you have to come to my house. Okay. I make the best fish curry in Goa. No, so, you know what this is? This is Baga. Baga beach. How it was. And because of how it was, the rice fields going into the sand dunes and into the sea with nothing there. And now it's a concrete mess. I became, after a designer and a writer, then I became the environmental activist. I would stand on top of trucks and stand on top of the village. The best part of Goa is that everyone understands English, and we would fight everyone. Fight the miners, and fight the land lobby, and fight everybody, and win. We stop the mining. And this is the Mapsa market of one of my projects as chairman of Green Goa Works that we did in the market. We converted, for the first time in the history of India, we converted a market into gobar gas and gave it to all the suppliers so that they can, all the market people, so that they can make their chai pani in their stalls and whatever it is. And it's the only market that gets its own gobar gas from its own waste. So then I became this environment. Began to do the research of all the Goan gods. Now this is Shanta Durga. Now you know Durga, all over India, she's going to war and she's fighting. And I'm so lucky this thing is not working, so they can't shush me out of the timing is not working. Durga, she goes fighting everywhere like me. But when she goes to Shiva, he said, listen, you're full of anger and fire and fight. Please go to Goa and become Shanta Durga. So she comes to Goa and she becomes Shanta Durga. The same thing how you know Krishna comes to Goa and becomes a Narka in his Kshatriya avatar. All over he's dancing with the gopis and playing around happily. But in Goa he comes as a warrior and slays the head of the Narkasur. And we have these two gods, Indian gods, completely different in the rest of India, but different in us. In Goa, for us in Goa. Now Shanta Durga, she's smiling very beautifully, this full face of gold and whatever. She has a very strange quality. She appears in dreams to us people on the Konkan coast, the entire Konkan coast, right from south of Surat down to Kerala. And she asks for three things. She asks for a house, she asks for a child, or she'll ask for saris. And if she asks for a house or a child, then you name the child or the house after her, and you take the child to the temple, etc., and get the blessing done in her name in the house. But when she asks for a sari, you buy a new beautiful sari, the most expensive one that you can find. And we are glad to say that every year, we will not tell you when they auction it, because you will all go there and start fighting. They auction it for almost nothing, because those priests don't know the value of the kanjivrams and the lovely saris, the paitanis that come over there. So I have managed to get 2 saris for my museum, which will go in the room for the mythology of the gods. And this is the Narkasur which gets slayed. He happens on Diwali Eve. We burn him on Diwali Eve, and then at midnight, after he's burnt, we light all the oil lamps and welcome Lakshmi. And in Goa and on the Konkan coast, especially Bombay, they have today what is called an old man, and they burn the old man. Nowhere else in the world is this old man burnt, but because the Portuguese took away our Hindu religion, we said now we'll fool them. They have given us a new calendar. On the 31st of December, we burn the old man. We are not burning the old man. We are burning our Narkasur. But the Portuguese gave us 100 in 1560 so many editing clothes, etc. But we had to fight them. Now this is Reshma Ghosh Fort. After that, I started becoming also this supporter of doing up the old forts. I joined Intact and whatever it is, and we got the old fort. Unfortunately, they didn't take my idea to convert the fort into a treasure hunt for children, because it's a very steep slope. And I said it'll be ideal for children. We have nothing for children in Goa. All we have are discos and rave parties and drug parties and God knows what else. All for adults. And but the fort has been restored and it looks very beautiful. You should go and see it. Then one day the Chief Minister asked me, Wendell, can you design our police uniform? So I said, yes, Mr. Rane, I will. Lo and behold, he thought I was joking. But 3 days later, I went with the sketches, and India got its first police designer uniforms in the country. And then I joined the Museum of Christian Art. So can you see how many hats I'm wearing? I'm like, I'm better than Durga. I joined the committee of the Museum of Christian Art. I was shocked that they even called me in there. I was openly gay. And then I said, is the church okay? Has the bishop had a drink too much or whatever? But anyway, I went. So now, can you see these 3 slides? For those who have not been to the museum, I think it's closed at the moment in Old Goa. You must go and see this museum. Can you see those Suryas on top of the head of Christ? So they came and told us, this is the new Son of God. So we said, okay, fine. And what do? You have to praise him and worship him. Then they made us make new statues with this new gods that we had never heard of before. We thought they were eating stones and drinking blood, but the Portuguese were actually wearing, just kind of eating bread and drinking wine. So we found these things very strange for us. And so we said, okay, fine, we'll make this god, but we have to add something on his head. So you're saying that he's the son of God, right? So like you have the descendants of royal families of Rajasthan, some gods that they descended from the Surya, we will put that Surya on top of him. And that's how it happened. And then we also fooled them. Some objects that were to go on top, like these angels, they were on top of an altar. Nobody saw the back, especially not the Portuguese. So we lifted his skirt and actually carved out his bum. And then we had a forest outside Goa on the border between Karnataka and Maharashtra, where we had a nice forest. It was like lots of, but over years the tribals they cut the forest down for their firewood. In the process, they got asthma, they got eye problems, etc., etc. So we told them, enough, stop. We will give you free gas, but you all will plant what we tell you to plant. So they planted indigo and mangista. Have you heard of mangista? It's a drug from the time of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, where it is antiseptic in quality. It's a red sap and it's a lovely pink dye. So 1 year, what happened was, and then what we did, we said, we'll give you the free gas and you all collect thrice a year and we'll pay you all for the leaves, the flowers, the bark, whatever we want from the tree. 1/3 of it only you'll strip. After 7 years, the forest comes back, animals would, and we guys to make the Kunbi sari that had died for 100 years because the Portuguese didn't want this sari. The Kunbis didn't want to wear it themselves because they were put in the lowest rank of the caste system, and the rich people didn't want to touch that sari and it was dying. So I said, we're going to make that sari again, but we are going to use different colors and change the sari around, and we revived a 100-year-old sari. So then I became the revivalist. So these are the ladies collecting all the sari, and that is the lovely Lisa Ray and Nayonika Chatterjee wearing the Kunbi sari. Oh, something else happened with that sari project and the eco dyes. The lady was sitting down on the floor cooking, right? What happened was, when we gave her the gas, we said it has to be on a table with a gas cylinder underneath. You can't cook with it at the side of you. So now she stood up. And for the first time in her life, the husband and children were not talking down to her. So it was a social revolution that she was on eye level with them. And then we get all these requests, and I'm such an opportunist and so stupid. I got a thing to go, can you do a coffee tin? Can you do polo, the mint with the whole wrapper? Of course we can. You're paying us 10 lakhs, we'll do it. And take a commission on the sale. That is my expert partner. I am a duffer at mathematics. I got 35 in SSC. They must have said this poor boy is getting a first class but failing in this subject. So and they passed me. So my partner does all the negotiation, and I just get and we did this coffee called Catwalk. There. And then I'm a big foodie. Every week I cook at least 3 new dishes to keep the kitchen on their toes. Downstairs there was my latest creation. I baked those poi breads myself. Down is my latest thing which we did about 2 weeks ago. I made a hummus, and I said, why don't we twist it around? Because I'd already made the sausage with the hummus that I spoke about yesterday. I said, we are going to put curry patta inside and 1 green chili. It tastes superb. You must try it. And then, then Bhandarkar called me. For 2 seasons, he would come and say, can I see your green room after the show? And he would go. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm doing this movie on fashion. Can you please write the movie? I said, no, I can't write the movie. I'm not a script writer. Can you style the movie? I said, you want me to spend 3 months in Mehboob studio in Bombay, where the cobwebs of whose time are still there. You know, if you shake them a little bit, they'll come and fall on your head. It's so dirty. With filthy toilets, back to my toilet in the chawl. I said, no, thank you. Will you do an appearance in the film? Done, page 3. Will you do an appearance in the film? I said, yes. If you flash my name, Vendru Rodriguez, across and give me a nice slot. So he gave me the slot where Priyanka gets her first big show in the film. And the reigning queen of the ramp was Kangana Ranaut. Both girls walked out with the movie. And then I did 2 other movies. I'm not going to say it because I want you to blink and miss it. Okay. Then we got foreign advertisements that came for styling. L'Oreal called me to Paris and said, we want to set up and sell hair color and straighteners to India. And I said, listen, you all are paying me a lot of money to be a consultant. I'll do the images, which you all can put in all your shops, all the hairdresser shops. But let me tell you one thing. Our Indian women have very beautiful hair, and they're very smart also. There's no way they are going to color their hair and straighten their hair. How wrong was I? Everybody was happy with the thing, and they were all coloring and straightening. But Lisa Ray was not happy. I mean, she was the star that was roped in. because they had the ad company said we want a gory chikni girl, which irritated me from the beginning. I remember when I joined as consultant for Lakme, I told Mrs. Simone Tata straight away. I said, Simone, this agency wants to get an award for sand, midnight, moonlight, dune color. I said, what are they talking rubbish? We are selling. Who's buying your lipstick and nail polish? That girl who's buying it on the road is only wants a red color, or a red orange color, or a red Rani pink color, because she doesn't understand this moonlight shit. She's not going to buy it. Please change the campaign. And can we stop doing only Aishwarya Rai and Lisa Ray? So I pulled Malaika into the ad, Bipasha into that, all the dark skinned girls did the ad. Now this girl, Lisa, who's my best friend, and by the way, got twins lately, she said, what have you all done to me? Because she has this beautiful body, very voluptuous on top, very slim waist, and no hips. I don't think children would have come out on those small hips. But she loved her breasts because they were beautiful. They are beautiful, sorry. But it was fighting with her hair. So Mr. Farooq Chotia, who had taken the photograph, airbrushed her breast out. And that's why she was mad. It was literally a case of making mountains into molehills. And then I started writing on travel because I go to all these exotic places. This is in Mongolia, where I actually had a Mongolian vulture that, I don't know how brave I was because that beak was too close to my face. But I had a glove and it was standing on the glove, but then it decided to walk up. The glove fell off and I had to like raise my hand like that. And that was it. Okay. And then we started to do gardening and got involved with that. And Simone Tata told me when I turned 40, and I'm telling all of you all to do it. She said, when you have turned 40, God has given you fame and fortune and everything. You're going to promise that you're going to do what we Tatas do. You are going to give your Saturday to charity. Morning. After that, 12 o'clock, then you go and do whatever you want. So my charity is going on now at the moment. But and she said, no signing a check. So we began to get involved with everything that we could get involved with. The school for the blind, children of parents with AIDS, teenagers with HIV, battered women, etc., etc. Please go and do something. Just 3 hours per week, that's enough. It goes a long way.
Audience questions.
Okay. Just this last one. So, if somebody asks me which is my most favorite collection, it is this collection called Visionaire, where nobody had thought of this. We made after 9 months, I studied this problem. And I put Braille onto clothing because a blind professor told me that he takes 40 minutes to dress up. His wife at sight, and he would pull out white shirt and say, I actually want to wear a blue shirt. And she would say, no, it's not white. And this would go on for 40 minutes. I said, that's terrible. So I said, I thought, and I don't know why no one since Helen Keeler thought of it. I said, let's put the Braille on the garments in small French beads or French knots. And that's what we did. And we sent the shirt to him. And he started crying. And I said, why are you crying? Dr. Acharya, he said, I'm crying because I can read it. I said, read it out to me. I said, what does it say? He said, it says the Wendell Rodrigues Visionaire Collection, color white, size medium. And we numbered the buttons as well so that he would never make a mismatch of the button. Yeah, okay. Then I will take the question, one sec. I have to finish this. Then we got involved with the handicapped people. The girl that you see on the right, she has no limbs and no legs below her knees. But she embroiders beautifully, and she does some of her embroidery. And the boy also does something for us. And this is cancer, so I'm going to leave it at that because they want me to take questions from the audience.
Just one or two.
One or two. One or two. Yes, please, ma'am. You know, not only embroider, she writes out our invitation cards and she writes beautifully. She writes like in calligraphy. She puts that needle in the small stump. There's a small stump where they cut off her arm, and she puts the needle. You have to threadle the needle and give her, and then she embroiders. Wow. Her name is Fulrani, and she lives 2 villages away from me, so it's very easy for us to take the clothes to her and then bring the clothes back. Wow. Next question, please. Next question, please. Yes.
I actually went to Rees-Magos.
Yes.
I was struck by how beautifully restored it is, but. I was talking about Rees-Magos and how beautifully restored it is, but I was struck by a very long board which lists all the events of the Indian national movement, Jallianwala Bagh, non-cooperation, etc., and nothing of Goan history. So I thought that was the most imperializing move, right? I mean, it's restored, but then it is fully inserted into the history of the Indian nation state with none of its own history. And surely you must have been really
no, I was not involved with that.
No, you must have been irritated.
Yes, I was, because that fort has got a very long history. It was where the first viceroys, when they came to India, they would stay there for 3 months while the old secretariat or the viceroy's palace in Old Goa was vacated, and they took away everything, and then this new viceroy would go and stay over there. Yes, please. I don't think we have time for any more questions. I'm just going to run through because I didn't finish the slide. Okay, since there's no question, I'm just going to tell you this. Then I began to fight 30 years ago for LGBTQ rights. This is my partner, Jerome Morel, and in 4 days, we are going to finish and celebrate 35 years. And for all that work, I got a Padma Shri and a foreign medal from France as well. I got a knighthood, which I think you got as well. No? Okay. That's it. Thank you very much for your time, your patience, and God bless you all. Remember Saturday. Oh, who said that? You will remember my story better if you buy my book, The Green Room, which is in the shop there.
New Delhi. She has worked with Mark Tully on all his books and co-authored with him India in Slow Motion. She has a passionate interest in water conservation.
Good morning. May I say first of all how wonderful it is to be here, and how you may have noticed in the name of this session that there is a not too subtle pun on wow and bow, the name for Stepwell, Vapi, Vapika, Bauli, Bauri. And Yuta has started in the 1970s studying water architecture in India, and feels very strongly that we look too much at the structures above ground and not so much at the structures below ground. And this is a wonderful architecture, and the wow of the Bauli, the vow of the bow, is much, much clearer with pictures. So I'm handing over to Yuta, and she's going to present to you some of her wonderful slides and tell her story through pictures.
Hello. Yeah. Can you hear me? No, Yeah. Good morning. Thank you very much for the introduction, Gillian and Gitanjali. As Gillian was telling, today we are discussing water, its heritage and conservation. And maybe the narrative that I will be showing you today is slightly different from what we have been seeing or we have been experiencing during the last 2 days, because I'm an art historian, so I work with pictures, I work with images, so I thought I'll run through a number of images just to show you what I'm talking about when we talk about water. So I will just go to the mic here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I think it's a bit easier for me to talk here. First of all, I want to thank... thanks. I want to thank basically Niloofar and Rahul to invite me to this session, to the Kushwant Singh Literature Festival, to present my work, my lifelong engagement with the cultural history of water. Thank you also, Gillian, for accepting to be the moderator for my session. And Naman, thank you for your interest in my work. I'm very happy about that. Because of the paucity of time, I will just briefly touch upon 4 major issues that are related to water structures, heritage, and conservation, before entering into a dialogue with Gillian and then having some questions from the audience. I hope that I can run through and not get too lengthy, because like my Austrian heritage and ancestry, I sometimes tend to be a little bit lengthy. So please cut me short, Gitanjali and Gillian, if I'm spending a little bit too much time on each of the visuals. So first, I'll just briefly tell you about the 4 topics that I will talk about. One is water monuments as unique architectural genre. I will show you the richness and variety of water structures that are there in India, all over India, in all the regions, in various formations. Topic 2, the aesthetic sensibility and functionality of water design. 3, the ecology of water and its place in the ritual life of the people. Number 4, water and commerce. How water structures were entwined with trade routes, which in turn then determine the cartography and topography of water monuments. Because of my experience that sometimes I get a bit too lengthy, I have sometimes made a small paragraphs which I will read out so that I can really cut short and present the topic as brief as possible because of the paucity of time that we have. Sorry. When water architecture engages with water, it designs, negotiates, and curates water in a specific spatial figuration. This language of water is part of the cultural expression of a community, of a region, or of beliefs and religious practices, or so to say, in other words, water histories are written in a social space and managed by the people in a participatory way in micro-social historical territory. Water design is an innovative, man-made solution to ecosystems, and the myriad forms of water architecture substantiate this. Here I just show you a few examples. We have here a water place, a temple tank in a South Indian temple. Here we have water as place, as space for pleasure and recreation. We can just see on the right picture, you can see the palace of Mahmud Begra, who was one of the most important and most powerful sultans of the Gujarat Sultanate, and the palace of his harem on the left. But we all know that riverfront residences, for example in Agra along Yamuna River, or in Benares or Udaipur, are very well-known places for the aristocracy and for living. Coming to the wow factor, we have here a stepwell, one of the monuments that are there in Delhi, which is fairly well preserved. Here I wanted just to show you and illustrate you that, as Gillian briefly mentioned, we are talking about water monuments, we are talking about monuments that are carved deep into the earth, as opposite to, let's say, a building or a temple which is constructed from the ground level into the sky, being surrounded by open space. That means you can construct whatever you want at will to a certain height. Whereas a step well or a water pond or a pond like, you have to dig into the earth. That means you have to, first of all, very clear knowledge about the geological situation, the hydrological situation around it, as well as you have to have a technical know-how to build to guard against the thrusts of the side walls so that the monument doesn't cave in and stands there, because it is normally open to the sky at this descending passage. So the technical know-how has to be expert, and that is what Indian architects have been doing the last centuries. And there are various systems that I will just briefly show you. Here, the next, no, sorry, I have to go back. Yeah, this I think is a well-known monument. I think everybody knows about it. It's one of the most beautiful monuments, and sometimes I even call it, it's an inverted temple. If you see, no, sorry, I will show you later on. It is a stepwell built with royal patronage, as I was saying, that some of the stepwells had a local idiom, some are built in a royal surrounding. So this is the stepwell of the Queen. It was built in northern Gujarat, in Patan. The magnificent, ingeniously conceived structures encasing water are an integral part of mainstream Indian architecture that includes wells, stepwells, ponds, reservoirs, tanks, temple tanks, ornate pools, rock cisterns, lakes, complex dam systems, canals, sluices, as well as riverside ritual platforms and lake embankments. So this whole kind of listing shows you that when I'm talking about water monuments, it's not that is a small kind of subject within the Indian art history, but it is a very important aspect. It's parallel to the mainstream architecture that is usually dealt with in art historical writing. And unfortunately, till now, writings on stepwells, on water monuments have received a stepmotherly treatment, and we are trying to reverse this now by some of the books that are coming out now in various platforms. The diversity of their architectural figurations and their hydrological engineering, the interplay of canonical and local idioms, the specific iconographic, aesthetic, and ritual characteristics, as well as their location in the regional ecological order, the water histories that are written by local communities or the ruling dynasties, make them important cultural constituents and are of immense art historical importance. Here we see one of the most favorite stepwell, most favorite for myself, because it is such a wonderful location, how this kind of stepwell, when you approach it in the landscape, you hardly see anything except the entrance pavilion, and after a few meters another pavilion in ruins, and it goes extremely deep into the earth. I have shown you here's the plan, that it is about 70 meters long and only about 3-4 meters broad, and at the end of the stepwell there is the well. And this again is really a wow factor. It was a wow factor for me when I discovered this just recently, a month ago, that the unique design of this stepwell, I think, will be the future study for myself. Why did those who commissioned this stepwell thought of this exquisite kind of plan with the steps going down? And I do believe from the article that I read in some of the media in southern India, this well is still being used by women of the locality to get water. I think I'll have to run a little bit further. This is the deep pond, a temple pond, in Rajasthan, in Abaneri, next to a temple, it was constructed. It started to be constructed in 8th century and rising up to the 18th century with addition all over this 1,000 years. One pond in southern India. Now coming to the aesthetic sensibility and functionality in the design. I hope I'm... So, a step well is built of 3 constituent parts. One is the descending passage, as you can see here, from the entrance on top, on the ground level, going down, and this step well goes down for 7 stories into the earth, and the intermediate constructions which are there because of the side walls, so that they don't carve in and that the passage remains free and open, and also that no water is oozing out on the side walls, but only at the end where the well is. And as I mentioned here, I hope you can still see it, that the well, at least in canonical literature, in the Shilpa Shastras, often is related to the Garbhagriha in a temple. That means the well part, the water part of a step well or any kind of water monument is considered the most sacred space of the monument. I just run through now some of the pictures of Rani Ki Vav, so that you just get an idea how beautiful and how exquisite this kind of water structure is. As I said, it's something like an underground temple. It's something like an inverted temple, as I sometimes call it. Or here, the side walls with the constructions, or the iconography, which is very much related to the mainstream architecture of the same period, of the contemporary period. For example, like the temple in Modera has these kind of sculptures and these kind of very similar kind of iconographies. Yeah, I briefly talked about the side walls, which is one of the most important structural elements in a step well, and here one can see the staggering kind of side walls, so that to make it more firm, against the side walls, against the power of the earth that is pressing into this kind of monument. And of course, the architects were very well aware of the play of light and shadow in these kind of descending passage, because it goes into the earth, it goes into darkness, so the entrance gives light to this kind of monument. And a monument like this is, of course, mainly a source of water, but also a kind of place for pleasure and recreation, the galleries around. And the steps are the most important way how to reach the groundwater level. I think I can only talk, I cannot talk really about all the details of these structural elements, which I would very much like to do, because they have very ingenious kind of systems, technical systems of joining the steps with the side walls. Or one can see here, as I said, the access, the steps are built in such a way that they create a kind of meditative access to the water which is the most sacred space in the step well, can't be just approached by running down into it, but you have to carefully select your steps, you have to carefully be conscious about going in. It's like going into a temple where you have to, where the consciousness kind of changes from outside world into the temple complex, then into the Garbhagriha, where you kind of merge with the icon, where you have the darshan of the icon. Like this, in a water monument, you have to carefully move down so that not to falter, not to fall into and have a danger, but that you really consciously move down to the most sacred space, which is the water. Coming to ecology, as you can see here, that water monuments are being used, are part of the social life of the people in the location, not only just for pleasure where the boys jump into the water. Here I just want to very briefly mention one thing, one very ingenious part of the architects of earlier times, that the well which is behind these kind of arched entrances, it has a wall there, so the water in the well remains clean, remains hygienically clean. It's not possible to access that water. It can be only accessed from top with a system of bucket like a pulley system in a normal well. But the water from the well, in a very intricate system of valves, can flow out into a small kind of portion where people can access it. They can sit there, take bath, wash clothes, or jump into it when it is very hot. And the interesting part on the left side picture is that this lithograph of the 19th century is titled as a Hindu temple. That means already in the 19th century, stepwells were considered a religious place. Yeah, just another image. I think everybody knows the Benares Ghats. I would not like to talk too much about it, except that it is one of the most important ritual spaces in India, and also for British visitors, not only for those who were serving in the country, but also for the travelers. And it was a must for everybody to visit these Ghats, not only being there, but also seeing the Ghats from the riverside. Ganesh Resurgence, where water again is very important. Water as religious topography. This is Akshardham Temple Complex, a place of worship for one of the two Swaminarayan sects, which has a water body surrounding the Garbhagriha, the Sanctum Sanctorum, containing, as the booklet says, holy waters of 151 rivers and lakes sanctified by Swaminarayan himself. Here, the ancient topography of India's sacred geography is symbolically appropriated and condensed into one single site, and that is Narayan Sarovar that you see here. In places without tanks, gods are not present, and that is what I wanted to say, that most of the temples in Bhubaneswar, and not only in Orissa, but all over India, in Western India as well as in the south, temples have to be at the site of a water body, or the other way around. A water body has to be near a temple, adjacent to a temple. Water as feminine space, so I thought, due to the main topic of this Khushwant Singh Literature Festival, I also should talk a little bit about what is the feminine space in a water monument. You can see here Mata Bhavani Nivao in Ahmedabad, which is a temple. It's actually a temple to the goddess, to Durga. You can see some of the images here. And the interesting part is that about 30 years ago when I started my work, it was just a small kind of shrine just adjacent to the well, just in front of the well. A priest was sitting, doing the kind of rituals that was demanded from the local community around. But now, within 30 years, it has become such a huge temple with daily rituals going on, with monthly and yearly rituals going on. And you can see that the flags and the people worshipping it. Yeah. Just another example of an image of the goddess of Durga, not in her anthropomorphic form, but in her ritual form, in her symbolic form. I don't want to go too much into detail. Coming to water and commerce, I think I have not too much of time, but I just want to mention, want to bring one example, and that is the area of Rajasthan, which is most famous as a home of fascinating variety of water structures, which were created due to the liberal patronage of innumerable princely states and the design aesthetic determined by the strategic position of the region as the trade and caravan routes from the ports of coastal Gujarat to the imperial centers of Delhi and Agra passed through Rajasthan, not only transporting cargo, but also mobilizing the architectural ethos of water structures, morphing them into a distinct local architectural form and the related socio-ritual customs. Particularly, Shekhawati traders realized that healthy and profitable commerce depended on well-conceived and comfortable infrastructure along the trade routes, and they were instrumental in commissioning caravanserais, wells, and step wells. Centuries before them, Emperor Ashoka had issued edicts ordering digging of wells and establishing watering stations along the roads, in addition to planting trees and mango groves for the well-being of the travelers and the traders. And here I just wanted to remind you of the image that you had seen with all the galleries, that step wells, especially in Gujarat and in Rajasthan, were built along the trade routes, and every 30 miles, every 1 day's journey for a caravan had a step well where the traders could spend the day, because Gujarat is hot, arid, there are hardly any trees around, so the traders and the caravans would stay during the day in a step well, had enough of water, had clean drinking water in the well, had water, enough water for watering the animals, the camels, the bullocks and so on, and enough space for recreation for during the day, and in the evening people would move again on, travel through the night till they reach the next step well to stay there overnight. Yeah, as I said, that Shekhawati area has developed a very unique style. I don't want to go into details here, but you can see that it's a covered monument, mostly having a well in the middle. And yeah, I think time is up, unfortunately. And as you have seen probably, that I basically talked about heritage, I talked about the visual aspect of it, but that I don't want to neglect the aspect. I think what we will now probably talk about, the kind of conservation aspect of it and how to preserve these important monuments. That my main objective today was, it was a little bit probably a completely different narrative than the other session that you had, but my main objective was to show you the richness and the variety of these kind of monuments and make everybody aware of it. Then, because unless you are aware of it, you don't know what to do with it, you don't know how to preserve it, you can't preserve it in a proper manner. And just yesterday I received an article about a wonderful idea. It was in Bidar, and Bidar is known to be a drought area, it has no water at all. 1 second. And you know, there was an activist who revived the Kares system. The Kares system is a system of underground channels bringing water from a mainstream well down from the hill to the location, to the people, to the towns. But he was an historian also, and he knew exactly how this Kares system works. It is a 2.5 kilometer long underground system of water canals. And because he knew that with a couple of people working with him, he revived this kind of system during the last 4-5 years. And now Bidar has enough water for the entire population, although there is drought all around. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I was a bit too lengthy.
I know that we're out of time, but I wanted to say that Jutta is possibly the most modest author that I come across, that she didn't mention her book at all. And the book is called this latest book is called Water Design. She has edited it and contributed it to it. And she's touched on some of the subjects in the book, but it covers a very wide area, and it is published by Marg. Now, do we have any time for questions at all?
Maybe one question.
One question. The lady at the back, yeah, lady here. Can you take a mic, please?
Hi, ma'am. I'm just curious to know which other country has this step well system.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Is it on? Yeah. Actually, I don't think there's... in Europe, there are hardly any steppers. There are no steppers like this. There are wells, there are fountains, and there are water bodies like on the surface, like we have seen the pond and things like that. But there are steppers in the neighboring regions. Nepal has many step wells. I know about steppers in the Near East, in Lebanon region. There have been excavations of archaeological people there, and they excavated steppers already from the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries onwards. Yeah, and actually I must tell you, the steppers started to be there from the centuries predating our era, in the Buddhist monuments and the Buddhist monasteries, for example, in Udayagiri in Gujarat and in Eldora and things like that. But then the first constructed steppers started from 5th and 6th century onwards till the 20th century, and the royal family of Vakaner in Gujarat built, I unfortunately couldn't show you the picture because it would have been really breaking all the limits of time, but the last stepper was built in 1935 in the orchards of the royal compound of Vakaner, and that place is really used in summer as a place for recreation and living when it is too hot in summer. Like in last century, people hardly had ACs that time. So they were living around the water body, having springs there. So because it was underground, first, second story underground, it was a cool area. It was open to the sky. So people had enough light and water around. So it was the best place to live in summer in Gujarat.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jutta. Thank you very much for being a great audience. Thank you.